I want to share with you a story I heard recently. Quite an amazing story. There's this new outlying community outside of a major Jewish community, and 10, 15 guys, they buy houses. How does this work? They buy houses and they move in together. So they'll have a minyan for Shabbos, and it's happening all over the world. So in this community, the first Shabbos, they realized they need to have a mikvah. So on Sunday, one guy says, I got a pretty big basement. I'm going to go to Lowe's, Home Depot. I'm going to get a tractor, and they make a design, and he starts digging in his basement. Now, he decides, he doesn't feel really good about digging in his basement without consulting with the neighbors. So, and he also doesn't have permits really. So he knocks on the neighbor's door, and this big non-Jew answers the door. He has a cross, a big beard, and he says, "Hi, I'm your new neighbor." And he says to him, "Oh, welcome, please come in." He comes in, he sees his neighbor's son is eating breakfast there, and they go into the living room, they sit down, and he says, "Look, we're your new neighbor." He brings him a gift, and he says, "I have a ritual bath that I'm trying to build in my basement." And he explained to him a little bit about what it is. And the man said, "Oh, hold on right there. Hold on one second." He said, "Would Rabbi G agree to this?" So he says, "You know Rabbi G? How do you know Rabbi G?" First of all, Rabbi G would for sure agree to this. But he said, Rabbi G is not alive anymore, so we really can't ask him. So he says, "Listen, if Rabbi G would agree, I agree. For sure you could do it." He says, "But more than that, I'm on the city council and I could help with zoning. So let me see if I could help push this forward." So the guy was dumbfounded. He's like, "Explain to me, how do you know Rabbi G?" He said, "I'll tell you this story." He says, "For many years, my wife and I, we couldn't have children. And we tried fertility treatments and nothing really worked. And then we heard about this Rabbi G, and we knocked on his door, and he answered the door as if we had an appointment, took us in. He sat with us. He worked with us for many months. And a year later, we were blessed with our one and only child. So I'm forever grateful for him." So why am I sharing this story? It's an amazing story about, a rabbi who was able to see. And I'm not mentioning his name on purpose because I haven't verified, but I just want to bring the idea out to explain a question that's bothering me about this week's portion where we read Eikev. And the Parsha starts out saying that if Eikev, you follow the Mishpatim, then I'm going to give you everything good. So the question everybody seems to ask is, what does Eikev mean? And Rashi says literally it means the heel, because there's so many questions over here. But the question I want to ask is, why is it unclear? Why doesn't the Torah just say what Eikev, instead of saying Eikev, just say what you mean? Say, do the simple mitzvos. Just write that, if that's what it really means. Or if it means mitzvahs that nobody wants to do, or if it means whatever it means, just say it. And even if you do say it, so then why not just emphasize the little ones as being important? Why do we have little ones and why do we have big ones? So in this video, we're going to try to deep dive into the Bas Ayin, the Pri Tzadik, Tu B'Av, and Rosh Hashanah, the connection, and primarily the Luchos Rishonos and the Luchos Shnios. At the end, I'll try to give some learnable ideas that we could implement in our daily life, something that we can get a take-home value of tools. And if, we're after Tisha B'Av, we have Tu B'Av. We start getting into the 7 weeks of Nechama, the 7 weeks leading up to Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. And if Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur is not something you're actually looking forward to, but it's kind of like having a tooth extracted. I don't know, you got to go through some maintenance, some personal maintenance in your life. If it's not something you're looking forward to, stick with me. This message is for you. Let's dive in. So I want to start with Eikev. Okay, I'm going to tell you the Baal HaTurim says that Eikev numerically is 172. 172 is the amount of words in the first Luchos. In the second Luchos, there were 2 Ten Commandments that were given. There were two sets of stones that were given. The first stone was written by God. That was before we sinned with the golden calf. And the second ones were given after. And the Gemara says that the difference between the first and the second is that the second one had the word tov in it, and the first one didn't. The Gemara in Baba Kama Nun Hey. So what I want to talk about is, if there's 172 words in the first Luchos, what's in the second? The Gemara in Baba Kama says, and the second Luchos is 189, but what's really the secret of the 189? It's the understanding that the second Luchos we have understanding. We're suddenly gifted with the Midrashim. It makes sense. And when something makes sense, it's so easy to suddenly put aside dogma, put aside listening to Hashem's will just because it's His will, and we suddenly begin to become a master of what God's will is. We begin to understand. We say, okay, this makes sense to me. So now I understand God's will. So now let's break this apart, okay? Because what we're getting to is trying to understand the connection between something mysterious called Eikev, the first set of Luchos, the first commandments, which were just given as dogma. Hashem didn't explain why you have to do this. He just said, this is what you do. And the second set of Luchos where Hashem says, okay, now I'm going to explain it. So there's a problem with each one. The first, when God just tells you, do this because I told you to do it. Take a lulav, take an esrog, shake it. That gets away all the bad spirits, like Rashi says. That doesn't make any sense. I don't get it. So the only reason I'm doing is doing your will. But when it comes to other things, had we just had the first Luchos of Nasev and Nishma we're going to do, well, what do? So they sinned with the golden calf. They said, we want to have an intermediary. We want to have something that we could relate to. How could we relate to God without anything physical? Without getting into the depth of what that means. But Sfasema says that just a commitment to do what feels good and what feels to me as being God's will doesn't work. So Hashem says, well, I'm going to want to give you the second Luchos, the 189, that has 17 words more than the first one. The first one is 172, the second one is 189. That's the Tov. Tov is numerically 17. We get the good, we get the understanding. So now we got it. We think we understand this is God's will. This is what Hashem wants. Suddenly, we have come to a point, we come to a crossroad where my will and what I think God's will conflict. And this is the difference between the Kibbud Avayim and the Shiluach HaKen. Kibbud Avayim is one of the 10 commandments. And Kibbud Avayim could be because God said so. That's like in the first commandment. Or Kibbud Avayim could be not because God said so, because He's your father, because He's raised you. So what about a father who didn't raise you? What about a father who doesn't care about you? Do you still need to have Kibbud Avayim? And let's take this a step to the side. The difference between the first Luchos and the second Luchos is that in the first set of commandments, when it tells us Shabbos, it says Zecher L'Maaseh Bereishis. Remember, to remembrance from the creation of the world. And that Shabbos suddenly becomes a global thing. It's not just for the Jews. Hashem created the world. Yes, He created for us, but He created all mankind. But God chose us and said, you only keep Shabbos. The second commandment said, the second set of 10 commandments say, keep Shabbos because you came out of Mitzrayim. Now you understand. Now you understand that, oh, this makes sense. I get it. Hashem, we're now a slave because we were slave to Mitzrayim. Now oh, okay. But Hashem says, no. Says the Sfasem, says the Pri Tzadik, we want to really ultimately go back to the first set of 10 commandments. We want to actually do it for dogma. But that's a very high level. Just Nasev and Nishma doesn't really work. So we really want to get there. We first were given Nasev and Nishma, we were first given the first set of 10 commandments. Then we were giving Nishma Vanasa, we were given the second set of 10 commandments, where we understand it, like the Gemara says, that we're given the understanding of the mitzvos. But then Hashem says, from Tu B'Av until, the Gemara says, it's 40 days until Chafei El, the day according to Rebbe Lezer that the world was created. And 40 days before a child is conceived, we begin to internalize, like it says, that the light begins to, what the pasuk says in Koheles, Ad asher techshach hashemesh va'or ba'erech va'kochavim. The kochavim, the areach, the light. There's a time going into darkness, and that's this time. This time is when the light begins to come out of the darkness. And that light, the way we develop during this period of time, before Rosh Hashanah, is to get away from understanding the mitzvos. And that's what Eikev means. And then now we'll get to the final thing. If I lost you, let's get back into it. Eikev is the things that you don't have a reason to do. I don't get it. The mitzvos that you say, I'll only do what I feel I get. That's what the second Luchos were. The second Luchos was, let me explain the Tameh mitzvos. When I understand it, I'll do it. But ultimately, says the Pri Tzadik, and the Fasten, the ultimate goal is to do it because it's God's will, not out of yira. Yira means to see, to fear. It's the knowledge of the schar, it's the knowledge of everything. Yes, we have all the mitzvahs, but there's different ways of doing the mitzvahs. We could do the mitzvahs into a way where we feel ourselves every year that we become a ger by mitzvah. When we come out of Mitzrayim, we become a new person. We become on Rosh Hashanah, we feel like we got a new year. We have a new year. It's an entirely new thing. And we feel like a katan shanayla dami. We feel like a just born child every year. And that's how we can understand V'haftem esager, that every person essentially just has a repeat of the year. And we can walk into this Rosh Hashanah thinking about how much of our religious life is locked into us understanding and how much has to do with faith. Now, I'm not asking for faith. You can't really ask for faith. And that's why the Torah is so cryptic here. It says, this really has to do with you. Every person's thing that he really secretly just doesn't relate to because he doesn't understand, it's everybody's Eikev. And here the Sfas Emes shines and says that Eikev, the heel, is actually what we stand on. That's really what gives support for the whole body. So not only is it the things that are crushed by the leg, the things that are in the leg, the heel is the furthest part from our brain. It's the things that we really don't understand. So I don't get it. So I don't do it. Or I don't get the importance of doing X, Y, and Z. I'm not going to fill it in because it's not the point. The point is that everybody has these things. And says the Sfas Emes that this is the difference between those who walk into Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur smiling and feeling this tremendous opportunity because they've worked and developed that their faith in Hashem, their knowledge of Hashem, their yira of Hashem, their sight of Hashem is not financially based. It's not about money. It's not about currency. It's not about values. It's beyond that. It's about God's will. That was Rabbi G. Rabbi G was able to not just follow the things that make sense. And we were merited to be able to see the direct results of his actions. But the greatness, when Moshe is trying to stimulate the Jews in this time before he left the world, he was inspiring them and asking them for greatness. He was asking them to go beyond following the mitzvos and the Torah and not breaking any rules, but to actually seek out the things that perhaps don't have the logic that we'd like to have, and be able to have the faith. And faith is, you can't teach faith. I can't teach you how to have faith, and you can't teach me to have faith. Nobody could teach each other. We can't teach each other to have faith. Faith is something that has to be experienced. And we experience by taking ourselves, says the Sfas Emes, out of the box of just the Dalet Amos, our inner circle, and inviting other people. And this is the way Sfas Emes says it's tzedakah. It's being able to, the tzedakah as in charity, as in be able to do things that not necessarily we get a reward for. And when we serve Hashem, it's like the way we serve our Father. If we only serve our Father because we feel that, we owe him or we're going to get something from him, or if that's our kesher, then suddenly it becomes a fear-based connection. The real tshuva me'ava, the real love that Hashem wants, is a relationship that's not based on reward. Yes, despite all these things, all the promises that we have of reward and this and that, we still need this leap of faith. And that's the question of the Balaturim. Can we go back, says the Sfas Emes and the Pri Tzadik, can we go back to the first Luchos? Because ultimately, the first Luchos were the Luchos that we brought to war. Every time we went to a war, a battle, we carried that in front. That was the real avodas Hashem, is to be able to be a conduit for Hashem's will. Hashem gives us everything, whether we're deserving or not. And being able to have this is the fuel for a meaningful Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Because then when we ask, we don't ask Hashem, how can I get, but how could I be a conduit this Rosh Hashanah to be able to give? Thank you. I myself need to internalize this message. This is food for thought. Let's together think about these ideas, take a look in the Pri Tzadik inside, and we could also discuss them in the comments. This is an unfinished thought, but it definitely gives food for thought. Thank you, and Shavua Tov.